Welcome to Let's Go Dutch. I'm Veronica Lewis, and our word of the day is slaperig. Slaperig, it means sleepy, and we're in the sleepy city of Bruges.
I'm gonna travel the world. I'm gonna go where the Dutch have been, and I'm gonna share it with you, my friends. Let's go Dutch. Let's go Dutch. Let's go Dutch.
We'll wandelen through one of Europe's best preserved medieval cities. We'll see some famous bloot and catch the famous view at Rozenhout and see the House van Groot.
A rhyme is a terrible thing to waste.
We'll enjoy some great beer in a pub without a Wereldsphere. So put on your clogs and let's go Dutch. Belgium is divided into two parts. The French-speaking region to the south is known as Wallonia. The Dutch-speaking region is known as Flanders, and Bruges is the capital of West Flanders. Bruges, or Brugge in Flemish, was an important trading city in the Middle Ages until about 1488. That's when the main lifeline to the sea started silting up and trade moved to Antwerp. Bruges fell into a long slumber. And that means today we are left with a perfectly preserved medieval city. This square, known as the Markt, is the heart of Bruges. Markt is the Dutch word for market. And indeed, there has been a market held here since 985. Dat smaakt verrukkelijk. The step gable houses lining the Markt belonged to the trade guilds in the 17th century. These are in a Renaissance style. Depicted on the statue in the center are two local heroes from the Battle of the Golden Spurs in 1303. Jan Bredel was head of the Butchers Guild, and Peter de Koninck was with the Weavers Guild. The name comes from spurs taken from the dead French soldiers, so many in fact that it spurred a statue. At that time, Bruges was under the control of France for 6 years. The trade guilds were powerful, and the French had been interfering in their business. On this side of the Markt, we have the Belfry. It was extended in 1482, and it's part of the 13th century Halle, which was the medieval cloth market. It was the cloth trade that brought great wealth to the city. The Flemish were skilled weavers, and the wool supply came from England. Although there was local wool available as well, in 1282 it was put down in writing that only cloth made from English wool could be labeled eerste klasse, first class. The Belfry can be climbed for wonderful views. There's only 366 steps. 366 steps. 366 steps. 366 steps. 366. Continuing around the Markt, we come to the Provinciaalhof. Begun in 1887 in a flamboyant neo-Gothic style, the Provinciaalhof is where the West Flanders government meets. Next to the Provinciaalhof is the red brick post office. We're going to head over to the second most important square in Bruges. This little square next to the Markt is called Brugge. It got its name from a burger joint that used to sit right over there.
That's not in the script.
Oh, yeah. That's not in the script. Burg in Dutch means castle, and sure enough, the first Count of Flanders had his castle here in the year 862. Today, the two most important buildings on this site are the Stadthouse and the Basilica of the Holy Blood. Building of the Stadthouse began in 1376 and took 44 years to build. The statues on the facade are copies. The originals were destroyed by the French, who were on an anti-religious rampage. Some statues were nobility and others biblical figures. Perhaps the French couldn't tell which was which, so they destroyed them all. The originals were painted and gilded, so it must have been even more impressive in its day. Built in 1402, this is the Gotische Zaal, the Gothic Hall. In 1464, the Assembly of the States General of the Netherlands met here. This mural depicts the holy relic of Christ's blood being given to the city of Bruges. These two have been keeping an eye on who's coming and going for a very long time. Attached to the left of the Stadthouse is the Renaissance Oude Griffie. It was built in 1537 and was the town clerk's office. In a corner on the other side stands the tiny Heilig Bloed Basilic, the Basilica of the Holy Blood. The lower chapel dates from the 12th century and is in a Romanesque style. The upper chapel is from the 16th century and houses the holy relic, a phial containing the blood of Jesus Christ. In the Middle Ages, holy relics gave a city importance, with the church being the center of power. When a Flemish knight brought the phial with Christ's blood in 1148, that put Bruges on the map. This little alley is called Blinde Ezelstraat, which means Blind Donkey Street. Let's turn to Billy Eric for a little tidbit of history.
It's quite simple, really. Once upon a time, there was a blind donkey who kept walking into this building, and he was constantly heard muttering, "I thought there was a street here." And he would bump into the building from either side, always muttering, "I thought there was a street here." After many years of this, the townspeople carved a passageway, and they named it Blind Donkey Street. The first day he passed through, he was heard to say, "I told you there was a street here."
Another fine tale there, Willem. Now this alley leads to a wonderful view. Around the corner is the Rozenhoekkai, and the view from there is the postcard view of Bruges. Break out your cameras. This is the classic view of Bruges. That's the belfry on the mark back there, and the house with the turret on the right is the Houdenwetters house. That was the Tanners Guild, the leather craftsmen, and the building is from 1630. You can catch canal boat tours here and investigate the ancient waterways that once brought prosperity to the city. Looking to our left, we see another huge tower piercing the Bruges skyline. It's the Onze Lieve Vrouwkerk, and that's where we're heading next. This is the Onze Lieve Vrouwkerk, which means Church of Our Dear Lady. It took 200 years to build and was started in the 13th century. Charles the Bold, Philip the Fair, Joan the Mad, Willem the Silent, Billy the Eric. Just seeing if you were paying attention. They had such descriptive monikers back in the Middle Ages. Perhaps I would have been Veronica the Songbird. There are two tombs of historical importance in this church, Charles the Bold and his daughter Mary. European history is a tangled, twisted maze full of alliances, marriages, and wars. Charles the Bold became Duke of Burgundy in 1467. His inheritance included present-day Holland, Belgium, and Luxembourg. In 1477, Charles was killed, but he hadn't sown enough seeds to produce a son, only Mary. Mary married Maximilian of Austria, and that put the Low Countries into the hands of the Austrian Habsburgs. With all the great Flemish painters about, it's not uncommon to find great works of art in the cathedrals and churches of Flanders. The treasures here include a Madonna from 1518, a Last Supper painted by Peter Porpoise in 1562, and the Virgin and Child sculpture by Michelangelo, commissioned in 1505. See that window up there? Well, right next door lived the wealthy Groot family, and that window was their private way of going to Mass without having to mingle with the plebes below. So this amazing building is the Groot House. You can see how it's connected to the church. This is now the Groot House Museum, and it's a fine example of how the wealthy lived in Golden Age Bruges. Before they started using hops to flavor beer, there was a plant mixture called Groot. The Groot family grew so wealthy from the control of Groot that it became their family name. To enforce the family monopoly, they employed some muscle the locals called Brood van Groot. This was all good until hops came hopping along that great timeline of history. Suddenly, there was no more Groot trade. Well, like all good rich folk with their hands in politicians' pockets, they managed to win the right to levy a tax on beer, so the family fortune continued. Let's talk about the Dutch and Flemish. They speak the same language, but the Flemish call it Vlaams.
Both the Dutch and Flemish come from Germanic tribes. The Dutch, the Batavians, and the Flemish, the Belgen. You know, this is extremely involved. Do we really want to sit here right now and go through all this history?
Not really.
Why don't we ride around, we'll just take in the stud, and we'll let the voiceover go through the whole labyrinth of history.
Goed idee.
All right. Bruges was a member of the Hanseatic League, which was a medieval trade alliance between northern European cities. While Holland had its golden age in the 17th century, it was the Burgundian period in the late 14th century that was the golden age of Bruges.
And what do we mean by Burgundian?
Burgundy is, of course, in modern-day France, but after the fall of the Roman Empire in about 843, the whole region came under the control of the French kings and their vassals, the counts. Before Charles the Bold, there was his father, Philip the Good. He became Duke in 1419, and at that time, the capital was in Dijon, but he moved the capital to Bruges. Between 1419 and 1443, Philip fought and bought his way around the lands, acquiring what would later become Holland, Belgium, and Luxembourg. But because Charles the Bold would later be killed without leaving an heir, Mary's marriage put the entire dukedom into the possessions of the Austrian Habsburgs, then threw even more marriage alliances into the Spanish Habsburgs' hands.
Bikes in Holland and Flanders are extremely inexpensive to rent. What we pay in New York City for 2 hours, here, that would be 24 hours. The bike is a great way to get around, and you'll feel like a local. Or you could do what we did. Pick a great hotel in a great location that have bikes to use gratis.
A
hotel that fits this description perfectly is the Adornus. It's adorned with a lovely canal location, not far from the Markt, and they have bikes free of charge. The hotel is named for a wealthy Italian family who settled in Bruges in the 14th century from Genoa. Use of the bikes are free, but you might have to play football with Arthur before heading out.
This is the Vismarkt. I don't think you need any translation for that.
In 1745, the fish market moved out of the Mark to here, right by the canal. It was covered over in 1820.
Here's a little historical house. It's the Customs House from 1478. At the time, the canal came right up to the Tolhuisje. Just as the canal is gone, so are the taxes levied on goods coming inland. Why, it's my old friend Papageno. Papageno. Natuurlijk, Papageno sits in front of the Koninklijk Stadsschouwburg. Bye, Papageno. Say hi to Buffy for me. This is the Minnewater. It was originally the inner harbor of Bruges. It was called the Binnenwater.
The lake was built around 1200 to make a harbor. Now it harbors only swans and romantic views. In fact, Minnewater means Lake of Love. The gatehouse, known as the Sauce House, dates from the 15th century. On the other hand, the Gothic-looking castle was built in the 19th century. The bridge was built in 1740. This tower, called the Poortoren, has stood here since 1398. It was used to store gunpowder.
One thing I find fascinating in medieval cities are the fortified walls and gates. Sometimes they're intact, sometimes in ruins, and sometimes gone completely. I think this is the prettiest of the city gates. It's the Azopoort, which means Donkey Gate.
The Azopoort was built in the 14th century. Originally, there were fortified walls encircling the entire city. This is the Krauspoort, the Cross Gate, and was the eastern entrance to the city. This gate was built in 1402, but the original dated from 1297. Nearby is the Smedenpoort, the blacksmith's gate. It was built in 1368, and in 1615 it was remodeled. The Genzapoort took 3 years to build, starting in 1361. During a siege in 1382, the Genzapoort and 2 other gates were destroyed. While the Krauspoort was rebuilt in stone, the Genzapoort was rebuilt in brick.
While Bruges itself is a museum, there are a bunch of museums to choose from.
The Hans Memling Museum is housed in the 13th century St. Jan's Hospital. Memling is a German artist who moved to Bruges in 1465. The hospital itself is also worthy of attention. The Groningen Museum has a great collection of Dutch and Flemish masters, including local boy Jan van Eyck and Hieronymus Bos. The Stedelijk Museum for Volkskunde is a folk museum displaying period rooms in a former almshouse. Like Venice, Bruges tends to get busloads of day tourists. They see the two main squares, do a boat ride, have lunch, and soon after, leave. Night brings out the magic in Bruges, and staying overnight allows you to experience all the charm. With the old buildings dimly lit at night, you really can feel like you're walking through a slopperig medieval city.
There's a little town about 4 miles away from Bruges called Damme. It makes a wonderful day trip. Half the fun is getting there, and of course we're going by bike. But there's also a ferry and buses that go to Damme.
Damme was originally the outer harbor of Bruges. Charles the Bold got married in Damme in 1468. In fact, it's possible to visit the mansion in which Chuck married Margaret of York. It's still there.
This is the Markt. And as you can see, it's market day.
Of course, no mark would be complete without a Stadthouse. This one, looking quite Gothic, took only 4 years to build. They finished in 1468. The newlyweds, Charles the Bold and Margaret of York, are on the facade.
Jacob van Meerlandstraat. He's the 13th century local boy who grew into the father of Flemish poetry.
Across the street is the former Spanish governor's mansion, known as the Grote Sterre. Now it houses the tourist office and 2 museums.
Walking along Kerkstraat, we come to the Gothic St. Jan's Hospital, where in 1249 it was a hospital for the poor. Then, from around 1340, we have the Onze Lieve Vrouw Kerk. Let's head back to Bruges. It's about time for a lekker beer.
A word about Belgian beers. If you're only used to dollar drafts, then the beers here can be a real eye-opener. They can be extremely strong, and they're not for chugging.
Didn't I just say they're not for chugging? Proost. Lekker. charming Bruges never disappoints. It should be on every must-see list. Well, that's all the time we have. I'm Veronica Lewis. Join us again next time on Let's Go Dutch as we explore more of Holland and beyond. Tot ziens!